They built 50 homes on my ranch. No warning, no apology. Just asphalt over soil my father bled for. They paved a road right through my land, then fined me for walking on it. And when I told them the truth, they laughed. They sent lawyers, they called the sheriff. But what they didn't know was that the only road out of their perfect little neighborhood belonged to me. So I did the one thing they never saw coming. I locked the gate, and I watched their empire collapse from the front porch of the land they tried to erase. This isn't just a story about boundary lines. It's about legacy. It's about standing your ground and what happens when a homeowners association bets against the wrong man. This is what really happened, and no one is getting out until the truth does. It started with a broken post. I was riding the southern fence line after an early frost had silvered the high grass, turning the whole valley into a sea of glinting blades. I'd ridden that same stretch 1,000 times before, maybe more. Nothing ever changed down there, except the slow turning of the seasons and the occasional herd of pronghorn drifting across from the East Valley like ghosts on the wind. But that morning, something felt wrong. My mare Daisy slowed without me asking, her ears flicking forward and back nostrils flaring at a scent I couldn't place. I swung down from the saddle boots, sinking into the cold earth, and handed her the reins to hold herself. I walked ahead, the frost crackling faintly under each step. That's when I saw it. The fence was simply gone. Not broken by wind or storm, not knocked down by cattle or fallen trees. Gone. Vanished as cleanly as if someone had rolled the wire up like ribbon and carried it away. At first, I thought the county might be widening the fire break again. But that didn't explain the deep, fresh tire tracks gouged into the dry, soil-heavy equipment, wide tread, running straight through where my boundary had stood since my grandfather set the posts by hand in 1967. I followed the tracks on foot, past the spot where that old barbed wire had once hummed in the breeze, past the grove of ancient cottonwoods whose roots had guarded the draw for longer than any of us had been alive. The land sloped downward, and when I crested the rise, the breath froze in my chest. Roofs, dozens of them all the same shade of tan stucco, gleaming under the low morning sun. Fresh concrete driveways still pale and unmarked. White mailboxes lined up like soldiers at attention. A brand new subdivision had taken root on the south end of my ranch, sprawling in perfect grid rows, where only last summer my cattle had grazed knee-deep in native grass. For a long moment, I thought I'd lost my bearings, that I'd somehow wandered onto someone else's property. But no. The ridgeline curved exactly as I remembered it. The old watering hole lay just beyond the cottonwoods, and the creek I'd dredged with my own hands years ago still traced its familiar silver thread through the bottomland. Everything told me the same impossible truth. They had built this entire neighborhood on my land. I turned Daisy around and rode home hard, heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't sold a single acre not since I inherited Redstone Ranch from my father, and he from his. I'd turned down every slick developer who came waving fat checks and glossy brochures promising partnerships and legacy preservation. I'd sent them all packing. This land was more than dirt and grass to me. It was blood and bone memory and promise, the only thing my family had ever truly owned, free and clear. Back at the house, I threw open the old map cabinet in the study. It still smelled of cedar oil and dust, the way it had since I was a boy. I pulled out the original survey plat, thick parchment ink, faded to brown, and spread it across the kitchen table. The southern boundary line ran straight through the heart of where those houses now stood. I cross-checked the parcel number on the county's online GIS map. Same number. Same owner, Redstone Ranch, Russell E. Merrick. No subdivision permit issued in my name. No easement recorded. No notice of any kind. It was as if I didn't exist. I tried the county planning office, but it was late Friday. All I got was voicemail and silence. So I waited, the maps still open on the table, the house quieter than it had ever felt. Saturday morning, I saddled Daisy again and rode south this time, cutting across the far pasture for a closer look. I needed to see how deep the wound went. As I neared the new homes, the details sharpened. Sprinklers hissed in steady arcs over half-grown lawns. A plastic swing set swayed gently in the breeze. A woman in yoga pants unloaded groceries from the back of a silver SUV, while two small kids chased each other around a driveway, still bright with fresh sealer. Bicycles leaned against garage doors, painted the exact same shade of beige. Then I saw the sign, small polished metal planted proudly at the entrance. Sage Hollow Estates, a premier HOA community. The words hit me like a slap. They hadn't just built on my land. They'd formed a homeowners association to rule it. I sat there on daisy reins, loose in my hands, staring at the sign until a white golf cart rolled toward me across the smooth asphalt. A woman in a crisp red blazer sat behind the wheel lips pressed into a thin official line. She slowed to a stop and looked me over as though I were something that had wandered in off the range. "You're not allowed to be here," she said, voice sharp as barbed wire. "This is private property." I kept my tone even. "I know. It's my private property." She blinked the first crack in her composure. "Excuse me?" "I own this land," I said, sweeping my arm toward the ridgeline behind her perfect houses. "That draw those cottonwoods, the creek running back there, it's all part of Redstone Ranch. I have the original plats, the deeds, everything." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible. Sage Hollow was fully approved by the county. We have jurisdiction." Something settled inside me then, not rage, not yet, just a cold, clear certainty. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Karen Delaney," she answered, chin-lifting with pride. "President of the Sage Hollow Homeowners Association." Of course it was. "Well, Ms. Delaney," I said, touching the brim of my hat, "I suggest you gather whatever paperwork you think you have. Because come Monday, we're going to have a very interesting conversation at the county recorder's office." She laughed again, louder this time, as if I'd told the punchline to a joke she'd heard before. "We have attorneys, Mr. Merrick, Russell Merrick. We have attorneys, Mr. Merrick. You'll be hearing from them." I nodded once. "I'm counting on it." I turned Daisy and started back up the slope. Behind me, the subdivision looked almost peaceful, families beginning their weekend routines, sprinklers ticking, a dog barking somewhere down a cul-de-sac. They had no idea a storm was gathering above their pastel rooftops. They had built 50 homes on stolen ground, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Monday morning broke cold and clear, the kind of winter light that turns every blade of grass into a shard of ice. I parked my old Ford outside the Elkhorn County Recorder's office just after sunrise, boots echoing down the empty hallway that smelled of floor wax and old paper. I'd walked these corridors countless times, first as a teenager trailing my father when he rezoned a grazing lot, later alone when I recorded his will. Redstone Ranch wasn't just lines on a map to me. It was the sound of wind through cottonwoods at dusk, the lowing of cattle on frosty mornings, the weight of generations pressing down on every acre. I stepped up to the front counter and asked for Parcel 12-1846, the southern quadrant of the ranch. The clerk, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a lanyard that read "Welcome Team," typed the number in, frowned, then turned the monitor toward me. "This is strange," he said quietly. I leaned in. The GIS overlay showed Sage Hollow Estates perfectly plotted, 50 neat lots each, with its own new address and recent transfer dates, some as fresh as the last 90 days. But beneath that glossy layer, the original 1963 deed remained unbroken, still bearing my family's name. "No subdivision approval attached to this parcel?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing official. There's a rezone request from 6 months back, but it never went to public hearing. No final signature." "Who filed it?" He clicked deeper. "Sage Hollow Development Partners, LLC. Post office box in Denver. And the building permits. Some are missing digital signatures. Others were approved by a temporary planner who left the county months ago." The words settled heavy in my gut. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate, arrogant fraud that had banked on me never noticing. "Print everything you can," I told him. "I'll file a formal records request for the rest." He nodded and started the printer humming. An hour later, I walked out with a thick folder of plats, permits, and transfer records, enough to start a fire if I chose to light it. I called Brenda Molina from the parking lot. She'd been practicing land use law in the state for 30 years, sharp as a branding iron, and twice as hot when someone crossed her clients. "I was wondering when you'd ring," she said without greeting. "I drove past that new subdivision on Mill Creek last week and thought, no way in hell they built that without stepping on your toes." "They didn't step," I said. "They paved the whole damn thing." She let out a low whistle. "You got the surveys?" "Original 63 plat, Dad's 84 revisions. And fresh county pull, no legal subdivision, no transfer, no easement. They just built." A pause, then the satisfied click of a lighter as she lit a cigarette she always smoked when a case smelled like blood. Then we've got them dead to rights. Want me to draft a cease and desist? Not yet. I want to see it again. Up close, on foot. She exhaled slowly. Careful. HOA presidents get twitchy when the real owner walks through their plastic paradise. She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, I parked just off the new asphalt entrance to Sage Hollow. No gate yet, only the concrete pads and hinges waiting for one. I walked in along the sidewalk, hands in my jacket pockets, trying to look like any other neighbor out for a stroll. The air smelled of fresh sod and paint. Artificial turf gleamed unnaturally green between river rock borders. A man in khakis hosed down his already spotless driveway, as though it might sprout weeds if he didn't. Children zipped past on scooters, laughter echoing off stucco walls. From the street it looked idyllic, the kind of place catalogs promised you could buy happiness in. But every step felt like walking across a grave. I reached lot 19 and stopped cold. The porch sat exactly where my father and I had built a simple 3-sided cattle shelter one blistering July when I was 14. I could still feel the hammer bites in my palms, smell the creosote on the posts, hear Dad's quiet grunt of approval when the last board went up. Now that same ground held a welcome mat that read "Live, Laugh, Love" in curling script, flanked by 2 Adirondack chairs painted coastal blue. A woman stepped out onto the porch, phone pressed to her ear. She paused when she saw me standing there. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but wary. "Just walking the old fence line," I said. Her brow creased. "This is private HOA property. If you're not a resident." "In a way I am," I replied, keeping my voice low. "This spot right here, my father and I built a shelter on it 30 years ago." I held the boards while he swung the hammer. Her expression shifted from confusion to unease. She took half a step back. "Are you with Karen?" "No, ma'am. Karen and I see property lines a little differently." I tipped my hat and moved on before she could call security, or whoever HOAs called, when reality showed up uninvited. As I circled toward the entrance again, I noticed something I'd missed before. The single access road, a smooth 2-lane strip of fresh asphalt, curved through the canyon and connected the entire neighborhood to the county road. It had always been an old cattle trail, rutted and dusty, but now it was paved, striped, and vital, and every inch of it crossed my land. 912 feet of it to be exact. No recorded easement, no purchase, no permission granted. I stood at the edge of the asphalt a long while, watching minivans and delivery trucks glide in and out, every driver oblivious to the fact that their daily commute depended entirely on ground I still owned. By the time I climbed back into my truck, the anger had cooled into something harder, cleaner. Resolve. They had built 50 homes on my ranch. They had crowned their theft with an HOA and a smug president in a red blazer. But they had built their entire world on a single, fragile vein of road. And that vein ran straight through my heartland. I started the engine and headed home, the folder of documents riding shotgun. The fight hadn't truly begun yet, but the ground beneath Sage Hollow had already started to shift. They just didn't feel it yet. The next morning, I returned with a purpose. I carried my original plat map folded in my jacket pocket, the latest satellite printouts, and 3 certified survey reports, one fresh from a firm I'd hired the week before, the others decades old, bearing my father's bold signature and the county's raised seal. All 3 told the identical story. The ground beneath Sage Hollow belonged without question to Redstone Ranch. I didn't come alone. Brenda Molina pulled up beside my truck in her black Suburban, dressed sharp in a charcoal blazer over pressed jeans and boots polished enough to reflect the sky. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years turning other people's arrogance into ash. We walked straight into the HOA's little clubhouse, a squat building with fake stone veneer, oversized glass doors, and an American flag hanging crooked above the entrance, like an afterthought. The receptionist looked up from her screen, eyes flicking to my dusty boots with barely hidden disdain. "Can I help you?" "We're here to see Karen Delaney," Brenda said, voice smooth as Riverstone. "We have documents she'll want to review." "She's not expecting anyone." Brenda smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "She is now." We didn't wait for permission. Brenda led the way down the short hallway. Inside a small conference room, Karen stood over a glossy presentation board showing an aerial layout of the neighborhood. She was speaking to a man in khakis and a Sage Hollow polo, likely her vice president, gesturing with a laser pointer like a general briefing troops. She looked up when we entered. Her face tightened. You again. Brenda stepped forward. Ms. Delaney, I'm Brenda Molina, counsel for Russell Merrick. We're here because your association is currently occupying and governing land that does not legally belong to it. Karen folded her arms. We've already had this conversation. Sage Hollow was approved by the county. I have the plat right here. She pulled a laminated map from a drawer and slapped it on the table. It was bright, professional, and utterly fictional. Brenda studied it for a few seconds, then arched a brow. This document places your development entirely within Parcel 12, 1847. Yet every home I saw driving in clearly encroaches onto 12 to 1846 land deeded to my client. That's not what our planner told us, Karen snapped. And where is that planner now? Brenda asked mildly. County records show he resigned months before this map was filed. Oh, and there's no recorded easement for your access road, which incidentally slices straight across Mr. Merrick's property. You can't just barge in here and declare ownership. Karen's voice rose color flooding her cheeks. I spoke for the first time. I don't have to declare it. I've held it for 40 years. You simply built on it without asking. This is harassment, she hissed. No, Brenda said calm as winter dawned. This is notice. You have 24 hours to produce any documentation proving legal transfer or easement rights. If you cannot, we will pursue a cease and desist order and, if necessary, a court injunction halting all HOA activities on this property. Karen's jaw worked silently for a moment. You're bluffing. Brenda opened her briefcase and slid a certified copy of the 1963 deed across the table. Here's the bluff. Recorded reaffirmed in 1984 chain of title, unbroken. Challenge it at your peril. Every homeowner here will soon know their dream house sits on a foundation of fraud. Karen snatched the paper, glaring at it as though sheer willpower might make the ink vanish. We'll see what the county says about this. Please do, Brenda replied. We'll be waiting. We left her standing there, the deed trembling slightly in her grip. Outside, I paused on the clubhouse steps and drew a long breath. The morning sun was climbing, throwing long shadows across the identical roofs. She won't back down easily, I said. Brenda adjusted her sunglasses. No, but she'll panic, and panic makes people sloppy. That afternoon, a cream-colored envelope appeared beneath the ranch gate. Not from a law firm, not from the county. From Karen herself. Heavy cardstock embossed Sage Hollow logo, her signature in bold black ink. Dear Mr. Merrick, it has come to our attention that you have been unlawfully entering Sage Hollow estates and making unsubstantiated claims regarding land ownership. Your presence has been disruptive to our residents. You are hereby notified that any further trespassing will result in legal action. Sincerely, Karen Delaney, President, Sage Hollow Homeowners Association. I read it twice, then laughed out loud under the wide sky. Trespassing. On land my grandfather broke with a team of mules. I called Brenda. She's doubling down, I said. Good, Brenda answered. Every time she puts that lie in writing, she hands us another brick for the wall. But watch your back. People who feel their little empire slipping can turn mean. She was right. The following day, a contractor crew arrived at the mouth of the canyon road. Orange cones, caution signs, a flatbed, loaded with steel gate sections. I watched through binoculars from the ridge. As they began augering post holes trying to install their own barrier on ground they had no right to control. They were attempting to lock me out of my own ranch. I dialed the sheriff's non-emergency line. 2 deputies arrived within the hour. One was Rick, a young deputy I'd known since he was a kid helping at cattle auctions. I handed over my deed surveys and time-stamped photos. Rick radio dispatch spoke calmly to the foreman, and 20 minutes later the crew was loading equipment back onto the truck. Karen showed up minutes after marching toward the deputies like she owned the county itself. This is HOA business, she declared. We have every right to secure our community. Not on land you don't own, Rick replied evenly. This road sits on private property belonging to Mr. Merrick. No easement filed. You want to argue it, take it to court. But right now you're done here. Her face went scarlet. This isn't over. I tipped my hat. No, ma'am. It's only getting started. That night, I opened the old file cabinet in my study and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in 20 years. Dad had labeled it in his careful block letters, Easement Leverage, South Access. He'd warned me once sitting on the porch, whittling a stick while the sun bled out over the hills. One day, somebody will try to claim that trail. Remember, son, every parasite needs a vein to feed on. That road is theirs. He'd been right all along. They had erected 50 homes on soil my family had stewarded for generations. They had crowned their theft with bylaws and fines, and a woman who believed a clipboard granted her dominion. But their entire existence depended on one narrow strip of asphalt I still controlled. And soon they would learn exactly what that meant. Thursday afternoon found me back in the hushed halls of the Elkhorn County Recorder's Office. The building always felt like a vault, cool, dimly lit, smelling of old paper and quiet authority. Brenda had suggested I go alone this time, keep the pressure low-key. No lawyer in a blazer, no dramatic entrances. Just a rancher in faded jeans, field jacket, and a sun-bleached ball cap carrying a thin folder of originals and a polite smile. In these parts, that still counted for something. Nancy, the clerk who'd helped me earlier, spotted me at the counter and gave a small nod of recognition. Back again, Russell. Yes, ma'am. Need to dig a little deeper on parcels 12, 1846, and 7 down by Mill Creek. She typed, eyes flicking across the screen. Lot of chatter about that new subdivision. Sage Hollow, right? That's the one. Her voice dropped. You're Edward Merrick's boy. I am. She glanced left and right, then leaned closer. Good you came in. There's been some odd things going on with those files. Plats pushed through without full signatures, survey backups missing. One planner from Denver signed off on a bunch, then vanished. Resigned, real sudden. My pulse quickened. Can I see what you've got? She hesitated, then printed redacted copies of 2 internal memos and slipped them into a manila envelope. One was a request from Sage Hollow Development Partners for expedited administrative approval citing time constraints. The second from the missing planner stated that due to assumed consent from adjacent landowners, easement filings and access permissions will be finalized post-construction. Assumed consent. The phrase burned like branding iron on hide. You didn't give consent, did you? Nancy asked quietly. Not a whisper. She nodded once solemn. Then they've got real trouble. Registrar's office is down the hall. Thomas Avery's in, he'll want to see you. Thomas Avery had been registrar longer than I'd been alive. Lean, silver-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. I found him at the end of the corridor, bent over a huge wall map under a magnifying lamp. Mr. Merrick, he said without looking up. Knew you'd darken my door eventually. You heard about the subdivision. I heard. He straightened, motioned me to a chair. Also notarized your daddy's boundary adjustment in '84 myself. He spread a large sectional map across the table and weighted the corners. With a red pencil, he traced the southern line of 12-1846 straight unbroken, then shifted the magnifier to the new asphalt road. That's your line, he said. And that's their road. See the overlap. Clear as day. Any easement filed for it. He shook his head. They claimed it was pre-existing public access, but it's not on the county road inventory. Never has been. Which means it's private. And if it's private and on your deed, I can close it. You can, he said slowly, legally. But it'll raise hell. HOA will scream. Residents will panic. City council will get phone calls till their ears bleed. I folded my arms. I'm not trying to hurt innocent families, Mr. Avery. But I won't let this theft stand. He studied me a long moment. You're not the one who started this mess. They bet a quiet rancher wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight. Happens more than folks think. Big money moves fast cuts, corners, figures. The dust will settle before anyone looks close. But you looked close. And you're here. He reached into a drawer and handed me a slim folder, certified copies of every boundary survey ever filed for Redstone Ranch, some dating back to the original homestead claim. Take these. You'll need the ammunition. I thanked him and walked out into the pale winter light, feeling the full weight of what I now held. Proof that Sage Hollow had been built without clear title, without easements, without proper public review, and with the apparent complicity of people who were supposed to protect the record. Back at the ranch, I spread everything across the dining table: maps, memos, deeds, surveys. Daisy whinnied softly from the corral as the sun sank behind the ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and cold gold. This fight had grown bigger than my wounded pride, or even the loss of grazing land. It was about every quiet person who'd ever been told their history didn't matter. Every family that believed a signature on a mortgage meant security. Every corporation that thought progress meant erasing what came before. My eyes kept returning to the narrow corridor of the access road, 912 feet of asphalt that linked Sage Hollow to the outside world. No legal right-of-way. No public dedication. It wasn't just leverage. It was absolute control. Close that road, and I wouldn't merely halt their expansion. I would isolate them completely. The thought sent a chill through me, not of fear, but of the sheer power now resting in my hands. It was legal. It was drastic. And it might be the only language they would finally understand. That night, I sat on the porch long after dark, listening to coyotes yip in the distant draws. The lights of Sage Hollow glimmered faintly down Canyon Soft and oblivious, like a village that had forgotten it was built on borrowed ground. They had planted 50 homes on soil my ancestors had broken with their own sweat. They had drawn new lines over old ones and called it destiny. But the true line still ran beneath their foundations, unbroken and unforgiving. And I held the key to the only door they had. Sooner or later, they would have to come to me. Less than 48 hours after my visit to Thomas Avery, the counterattack arrived in a certified envelope taped to my front gate. Thick cream paper, embossed gold Sage Hollow crest the works. I carried it inside, slid it open with a pocket knife, and spread the pages across the kitchen table. Notice of HOA infractions, Sage Hollow Estates. The list was almost comical in its desperation. Violation. Unauthorized entry into community common areas. Violation 2. Interference with HOA governance and operations. Violation 3. Installation of unapproved signage. They meant the small, no trespassing sign. I'd nailed to a cedar post on my own side of the creek. Violation 4. Aggressive and intimidating conduct toward HOA officers and residents. At the bottom in bold caps. Total fines assessed $14,250 to $100. Failure to pay or cure within 10 days may result in lien placement and restricted community access. Signed, of course, with Karen Delaney's dramatic looping flourish. I stared at it a long moment, then let out a slow breath that fogged in the cold morning air. They were trying to bury me under their own paper empire, wielding covenants and fines like weapons against the man whose ground they were standing on. I photographed every page and emailed them to Brenda. Her reply came within minutes. This is priceless. They just admitted in writing that they believe their HOA has jurisdiction over you and therefore over your land. Keep it safe. It's Exhibit Gold. She was right. The notice was worthless. Legally, I wasn't a member. My parcel had never been annexed, but it showed how far Karen was willing to go to keep control. That same afternoon, I drafted my own letter. Simple, direct, printed in large block type on plain white stock. I drove it down myself and taped it to the glass door of the HOA clubhouse, while a couple of residents watched from their driveways. Notice of trespass and unauthorized development. To the Board of Directors, Sage Hollow Homeowners Association. The residences' roadways and common areas of Sage Hollow Estates have been constructed upon land legally owned by Russell E. Merrick, parcel 12 to 1846, Elkhorn County. No deed transfer, easement, lease, or permission of any kind has ever been granted for this use. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist all activities that infringe upon said property, including but not limited to collection of HOA dues or fines predicated on authority over this land and all use of the private access road crossing Redstone Ranch. Continued violation will result in physical restriction of access and immediate legal action for trespass damages and injunctive relief. Russell E. Merrick, owner, Redstone Ranch. I stepped back, snapped a photo of the notice glowing under the clubhouse lights, and walked away. Karen called before I'd even reached the truck. Mr. Merrick, she began, voice tight with forced civility, posting threats on our clubhouse is highly inappropriate. You will remove that document at once, or we will report it as vandalism. I posted a legal notice on property I own, I replied. Feel free to have your attorneys contact Brenda Molina. She's expecting them. A long pause. You're making a serious mistake, she said at last. You're going to upset a great many people. Ma'am, the mistake was made when someone decided my family's land was up for grabs. I'm just correcting the record. She hung up without another word. That night, my trail cameras caught movement along the eastern fence, 2 men in business casual clipboards in hand flashlights sweeping the ground. They stopped at a corner post, took photos, then melted back into the brush when Daisy let out a sharp whinny from the corral. The next morning brought another certified envelope, this one bearing the letterhead of a Denver law firm. A formal cease and desist this time, against me, accusing me of harassment, intimidation, unlawful interference with access, and defamation. It demanded our move all signage and cease all obstructive behavior immediately. Brenda laughed when I read it to her over speakerphone. "They're flailing," she said, "trying to paint you as the bully before we file." Perfect, we go on offense. By evening, she had drafted and filed our civil complaint in Elkhorn County Superior Court. Verified chain of title, survey proof of encroachment, absence of any easement or transfer, photographic evidence of construction on my land, copies of Karen's fine notice and the Denver firm's letter, emergency motion for temporary injunctive relief. We served the entire HOA board the very next morning at the start of their regularly scheduled monthly meeting. Brenda handed each director their packet with cool precision while I stood quietly behind her. Karen tried for a brittle smile that never reached her eyes. "You'll regret this," she muttered as we turned to leave. Brenda paused just long enough to reply. "The only thing we regret is how long it took to stop you." By noon, the board had canceled the rest of their agenda and gone into emergency executive session. By nightfall, my phone began to ring 4 different residents' voices, shaking, asking if the rumors were true. Were their homes really undisputed land? Would they lose everything? I kept my answers short and calm. Told them to read the public filings, talk to their own attorneys, demand answers from their board. The fines Karen had tried to hang around my neck evaporated like morning mist the moment truth touched them. And the real storm was only beginning to gather. Because I had decided it was time to turn words into action. Time to close the vein. Early Saturday, I called Mac Hadley, retired welder, old friend. The man who could build a gate strong enough to hold back a charging bull and make it look graceful doing it. 14-foot swing gate, I told him. Heavy pipe steel core, reinforced posts set in concrete. Remote opener optional, but I want it mean. He chuckled down the line. Mean I can do when? Today. By sundown, the gate stood black and tall across the road, posts sunk deep, crossbar chained, and padlocked. I hung a simple metal sign beside it. Private property. Road closed to unauthorized traffic. Trespassers prosecuted. Then I parked my truck across the approach lights off and waited for dawn. They had raised 50 homes on ground that still bore my family's name in the county books. They had tried to find me, threaten me, paper me into submission. But now the only way in or out ran through a gate I controlled. And tomorrow morning, Sage Hollow would wake up to find its world a little smaller. Sunday morning dawned crisp and bright. The kind of winter light that makes every edge sharp and every shadow deep. I was up before the sun, coffee in hand, watching from the ridge with binoculars as the first rays touched the black steel gate I'd raised the day before. At 6:15, a silver sedan appeared, slowed headlights sweeping across the chain and padlock. The driver hesitated, then executed a careful 3-point turn and retreated down the canyon. 15 minutes later, a pickup tried to skirt the gate through the dry wash, only to bog down axle deep in sand tires spinning uselessly until the driver gave up and called for a tow. By 8 o'clock, I counted 9 vehicles idling in confusion at the gate drivers on phones, some stepping out to take pictures of the sign. A few tried waving at my distant silhouette on the ridge, as if a friendly gesture might magically open the barrier. At 8:42, the calls began. First the HOA office number, then Karen's personal cell flashing on my screen. Then the City Public Works line. I let them all ring through to voicemail. At 10:03, a black Escalade rolled to a stop directly in front of the gate. Karen Delaney stepped out dressed this time, in pressed slacks and a navy coat, hair pulled back tight. She stared at the gate as though she could will it open. "You can't do this," she shouted up the slope, voice carrying on the still air. "This is not a private road. It's the only access for an entire community." I walked down slowly, boots crunching on frost-stiff grass, until I stood on my side of the fence line. "It's private," I said, voice calm. "Always has been. No easement ever filed. You're welcome to check the county records yourself. We have rights of access. People live here, families, children, essential workers. You have the right to live on the land you built on," I replied. "You just don't have the right to cross mine to get there." Her face flushed deep red. "This is criminal endangerment. You're trapping people." I lifted the thick folder in my hand, copies of deeds, surveys, the temporary injunction Brenda had filed late Friday, and would have stamped first thing Monday. "Not criminal," I said. "Documented, certified, and entirely within my rights." She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. "We'll have the sheriff here within the hour. I hope he brings coffee, I said. It's cold out. He did arrive, Deputy Rick again, same tan cruiser crunching up the gravel. He greeted me with a nod, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, I've reviewed Mr. Merrick's paperwork. The road sits on his deeded property. No recorded easement. He's within his rights to restrict access. You're taking his side, she demanded. I'm taking the recorded deed side, Rick said evenly. If you believe otherwise, file in civil court. Until then, this gate stays. Karen looked from Rick to me, eyes blazing. What do you want, Merrick? Money? An apology? Name your price. I met her gaze without flinching. I want what was taken returned. I want the truth told. And I want respect for boundaries mine and everyone else's. She stood there a long moment, breath fogging in the cold, then climbed back into her Escalade and drove away, tires spitting gravel. By early afternoon, the news vans arrived. Channel 4 set up just outside the canyon mouth, a reporter in a navy blazer gesturing dramatically in front of the gate, while the camera panned across the locked barrier. Within hours, the story was everywhere: rancher locks, gate traps, entire subdivision in land dispute. They framed it as a standoff, a stubborn cowboy versus helpless families. They didn't mention forged plats or missing easements, or the fact that every home in Sage Hollow sat on ground still titled to Redstone Ranch. I gave no interviews. I didn't need to. By evening, the subdivision was in chaos. Social media pages for Sage Hollow, usually filled with reminders about lawn maintenance and pool hours, exploded with frantic posts. Residents arguing with one another. Photos of the gate circulating. Someone started a petition demanding Karen's resignation. Another thread asked whether title insurance would cover being landlocked by the actual owner. Dean, the resident from Lot 12, who'd quietly reached out before, texted me directly. And they're losing it down here. Board just sent an email promising swift legal resolution. Half the neighborhood wants Karen gone. The other half is terrified they'll never get out. I replied only, tell them to ask their board why they built on land with no clear title. That night, I sat on the porch long after dark, the canyon quiet, except for the occasional distant slam of a car door or raised voice echoing up the walls. The lights of Sage Hollow flickered below like a scattered constellation, suddenly aware it was surrounded by darkness. They had constructed 50 homes on Earth my family had guarded for 3 generations. They had tried threats, fines, lawyers, even the sheriff. Now the gate stood silent and immovable between their world and the rest of the county. And for the first time since I'd crested that ridge and seen the rooftops, the balance had shifted. They weren't dictating terms anymore. They were waiting to see what I would do next. I finished my coffee, the cup warm against cold hands, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The road was closed. The vein was pinched. And tomorrow, when Brenda's emergency injunction hit the judge's desk, it would become ironclad. Sage Hollow had built its kingdom on sand. Now the tide was coming in. Monday morning brought the first real victory. Brenda met me at the courthouse steps, her red folder thick with every scrap of evidence we'd gathered, the original deeds, yellowed with age, fresh surveys marked in precise red ink, time-stamped photos showing the encroachment from bare earth to finished foundations. Judge Eric Whalen's chamber smelled of polished wood and coffee, the kind of quiet space where fates were decided with a gavel and a signature. He reviewed our motion for emergency injunctive relief while we sat waiting, flipping pages with deliberate care. Finally, he looked up, glasses perched on his nose. You're telling me an entire HOA community, 50 homes, was developed without a valid easement, without the landowner's knowledge, and now they're fining him for asserting his rights? Brenda nodded crisply. Yes, Your Honor. The access road is the linchpin. It crosses Mr. Merrick's property for 900 feet. No easement recorded, no permission granted. And the HOA's plat map, it's fabricated referencing a non-existent parcel. The judge rubbed his chin, glancing at the forged document Brenda had highlighted in yellow. This is bold even for developers. Assuming consent post-construction, that's not how property law works. He signed the order within the hour. Temporary injunction. Access restriction. Elkhorn County, Superior Court. Enforcing landowner's right to close private road pending full hearing. Emergency vehicles and essential traffic permitted under city supervision. All other access denied until resolution. I drove straight back to the gate, the injunction warm in my hand like a talisman. The sheriff's tape still cordoned off Karen's failed detour attempt. The HOA had tried bulldozing a crude bypass through BLM land overnight only to be shut down by federal rangers before dawn. I replaced my handwritten sign with a new metal plaque Mac had engraved overnight. Court-ordered access restriction. Injunction 4657A, Elkhorn County Superior Court. Unauthorized entry prohibited. Contact legal counsel for exceptions. 3 chains wrap the gate now, each with its own lock keys dangling from a chain around my neck. The rest of the day unfolded like a slow-motion unraveling. Drivers arrived in waves, commuters cursing into phones, parents explaining to confused children why school buses couldn't come through. Most turned back quietly. A few yelled demands across the fence, recording videos for social media. But some approached with resignation in their eyes, asking polite questions about the dispute as if finally seeing the cracks in the foundation they'd trusted. By mid-afternoon, a news helicopter thumped overhead, its camera sweeping the isolated neighborhood, while a reporter narrated from below. Trapped behind a court-enforced barrier, residents of Sage Hollow Estates face an uncertain future after discovering their homes were built on disputed ranch land. They painted me as the gatekeeper, the one man holding a suburb hostage. But the truth was seeping out: the forged maps, the missing easements, the HOA's desperate fines against the rightful owner. Karen called another emergency board meeting that evening in the clubhouse. Dean from Lot 12 texted me a live video feed, the room packed, shoulder to shoulder, air thick with tension. Voices overlapped in chaos. How could you approve this without checking? My mortgage, is it even valid? My husband's stuck in town, can't get home for dinner. Karen stood at the front, red blazer rumpled projector flickering behind her with a timeline titled Path to Resolution. She tried to project calm authority, blaming administrative oversights and developer misrepresentations, promising negotiations and legal challenges. But the room wasn't listening anymore. A young father stood up. You told us everything was clear. Now we're prisoners in our own homes. An elderly woman clutched her walker. I can't even get to my doctor appointment tomorrow. Karen's voice cracked on her next words. We're handling it. You handled nothing, someone shouted from the back. The video cut when Dean had to duck out, but his text followed. She's cracking. Half the board wants to dissolve. They're talking settlement already. I watched the footage twice on my porch as night fell, the canyon wind carrying faint echoes of raised voices from below. The gate stood sentinel in the darkness, chain glinting under moonlight. They had dreamed up 50 homes on land laced with my family's history. They had wielded their HOA rules like a shield against the truth. But now the injunction made my control unbreakable. The news made their secrets public, and their own residents were turning against them. The power had shifted irrevocably. And as the first stars pricked the velvet sky, I knew the endgame was approaching, not with destruction, but with the simple, inexorable force of facts. Sage Hollow's isolation wasn't punishment. It was consequence. And consequences, once set in motion, have a way of reshaping everything they touch. The morning after the injunction, Karen tried one last desperate gambit. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel long before I saw her slow, deliberate, no escort this time. She parked her Escalade just short of the gate and walked the rest of the way on foot boots clicking against the frost-hardened dirt. No red blazer today. Just a plain wool coat, hair loose around her shoulders, face stripped of its usual armor of makeup and certainty. She carried a manila folder clutched against her chest like a shield. Mr. Merrick, she called, stopping a respectful distance from the fence. 5 minutes. Please. I'd been splitting firewood on the ridge axe, still in hand. I set it down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked over to lean against the top rail. 5 minutes, I agreed. She opened the folder with fingers that trembled just slightly. Inside were printed proposals, access agreements, lease offers, outright purchase of the road strip at escalating prices. One page even suggested naming the road after my father, Edward Merrick Way. I didn't know about the forgery, she said quickly, words tumbling out. The developer swore everything was clean. Title reports, approvals, all of it. I trusted the professionals. I was just trying to build a safe place for families. She paused, searching my face. I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to fix this. For the people who bought homes in good faith. For the kids who can't get to school without detours that add an hour each way. For the paramedics who now have to circle the long way around. I listened without interrupting, the wind tugging at my coat. You've made your point, she continued, voice softening. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But punishing an entire neighborhood won't bring your grazing land back. Let us buy the road. Let us make it right. I studied her for a long moment. The woman who'd once threatened me with attorneys and fines now stood humbled, offering concessions she would have scoffed at weeks ago. Maybe she was sincere. Maybe this was just another tactic. It didn't matter. You tried to fine me $14,000, I said quietly, on land you knew or should have known you had no claim to. You sent contractors to gate me out. You called the sheriff on me, and only now when your own residents are turning on you do you come asking for mercy. Her shoulders sagged. I was protecting my community. You were protecting a lie, I replied, and now that lie is collapsing under its own weight. She closed the folder slowly. So what do you want then? To tear it all down. Force 50 families into foreclosure. I looked past her down the canyon, where the rooftops nestled like bright boxes against the winter-brown hills. I haven't decided yet, I said, but you'll know when I do. She lingered another heartbeat, eyes searching mine for some crack of compromise, then nodded once and walked back to her vehicle. The Escalade's engine turned over with a low growl and disappeared around the bend. That evening, the national story broke wide open. CNN ran drone footage at the top of the hour, 50 identical homes, ringed by canyon walls, the black gate standing like a period at the end of a sentence. The anchor's voice was grave. A quiet land dispute in rural Colorado has escalated into a modern-day siege, one rancher, one gate, and an entire subdivision cut off from the world. They interviewed Karen on the clubhouse sidewalk, flanked by two stone-faced board members. She looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, but she faced the cameras with practiced poise. This isn't just about property lines, she said. It's about human lives, children missing school, workers unable to commute. One man has decided to punish all of us for mistakes none of us made. The segment cut to file footage of me on the ridge, silent arms folded watching. They called me reclusive rancher Russell Merrick. They did not mention the forged plats, but the internet did. By nightfall, forums and local news comment sections filled with leaked court filings, screenshots of the missing easements, side-by-side comparisons of the real boundary and the HOA's fake map. Someone posted Nancy's redacted memos. Someone else found the Denver Developers LLC had quietly dissolved. The narrative was shifting. That same night, Dean invited me to the clubhouse town hall. You don't have to speak, he texted. Just come, see what's happening. I went. The room was packed, standing room only, folding chairs crammed between potted palms, the air thick with coffee and tension. Residents I'd never met turned to stare as I slipped in and took a spot against the back wall. Karen stood at the podium beneath a projector screen titled Community Update and Restoration Plan. Charts, timelines, bullet points about ongoing negotiations and legal countermeasures. But the crowd wasn't having it. A woman near the front stood first. You told us at closing that title was clean. My family sold our house in Denver based on that promise. Now we're trapped. A man in scrubs, night shift nurse, by the look of him, raised his voice. I've added 40 minutes to every commute. I'm exhausted. How is this acceptable? Someone else waved mortgage papers. Will our title insurance even cover this, or are we all underwater on homes built on fraud? Karen tried to steer the meeting back to her slides, but the questions kept coming sharper each time. Then a veteran in his 60s near the front pointed straight at her. You signed the plats. You collected our dues. You knew. The room erupted. I stepped forward then, not planning to speak, but the words came anyway. May I say something? Silence fell like a blanket. Karen's eyes widened. This meeting is for residents only. He was invited. Dean called from the side. Let him speak. I walked to the open space in front of the screen and set a single folded document on the projector table, the original 1963 deed. This is the title to the land you're all living on, I said, voice steady. It's never been sold, never subdivided, never transferred. Not 1 square foot. The road you drive every day, still mine. No permission ever given. I turned to face the crowd. I didn't create this mess. I didn't sell you faulty dreams. But I won't let anyone erase my family's history with fresh asphalt and pretty covenants. A few heads nodded. More looked down ashamed or thoughtful. I'm not here to ruin lives, I continued. I'm here to reclaim what was stolen, and I will do it legally, openly, and completely. I left the deed on the table and walked out. The cold night air hit my face like baptism. Behind me, the clubhouse doors stayed closed, but I could hear the voices rise again, angrier, more desperate, aimed squarely at the woman who had promised them paradise. Karen's grip was slipping. The city was watching. The courts had spoken. And the residents, Many for the first time were waking up to the cost of blind trust. They had erected 50 homes on ground that still whispered my name in every survey marker. They had tried to bury the truth under bylaws and bravado. But truth once unearthed has a way of reshaping the landscape forever. And the reshaping had only just begun. The lawsuit came faster than winter snow. Sage Hollow, HOA v. Russell Merrick, landed in my mailbox like a declaration of war, thick expensive paper accusations stacked higher than the canyon walls. Malicious obstruction. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Interference with contractual relations. Even sabotage of essential community infrastructure. They sought damages, punitive awards, and an immediate order forcing me to remove the gate and pay their legal fees. Brenda read the complaint over coffee at my kitchen table and actually smiled. "They're not trying to win," she said, tapping the pages. "They're trying to bleed you dry with process." Classic last gasp. We countersued the same week. Russell Merrick v. Sage Hollow Homeowners Association. Karen Delaney and Sage Hollow Development Partners, LLC. Counts trespass, fraudulent conveyance, slander of title, intentional interference with property rights, and civil conspiracy. We asked for compensatory damages, punitive damages, quiet title on the encroached parcel, and full attorney fees. The court scheduled the main hearing 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the circus arrived in full. News trucks parked along the county road. Reporters camped at the gate with telephoto lenses. Residents who supported me hung handmade signs on their balconies. "We stand with Russell." Others glared from windows or posted angry rants online, blaming me for falling property values. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps looked like a county fair. Folding chairs, coffee thermoses, even a few picnic coolers. Someone sold t-shirts that read "Free Sage Hollow" on one side and "Respect Property Lines" on the other, depending on which way you turned. Inside the courtroom was packed. Brenda wore her courtroom armor charcoal suit, hair pulled back, severe boots polished to a mirror. I wore clean jeans, pressed shirt, and the same weathered hat I'd had since Dad's funeral. We didn't need theatrics. We had facts. Brenda laid them out like a surgeon. Exhibit A. The unbroken chain of title from 1963 to present. Exhibit B. Side-by-side aerials, open pasture 1 year, 50 homes the next. Exhibit C. County records confirming no easement ever filed for the access road. Exhibit D. The HOA's own forged plat map parcel number fabricated. Exhibit E. Karen's $14,250 fine, notice addressed to me, the legal owner. Exhibit F. Emails and memos from the vanished planner admitting assumed consent. Their attorney, a slick Denver litigator with gelled hair and Italian loafers, argued adverse possession and equitable estoppel, claiming the subdivision's open use of the road for months had created implied rights. Brenda cross-examined him into knots. Counsel, does adverse possession apply? When the true owner discovers the encroachment and immediately asserts his rights. Well, typically it requires years of hostile. Years these defendants do not have. Next question. Then Karen took the stand. She wore navy pearls, the picture of wounded suburban dignity. Voice, soft eyes, glistening just enough. "I only wanted to create a safe, beautiful community," she said. "I trusted the professionals. I never intended harm." Mr. Merrick's actions have terrified residents, children afraid to go outside, families unable to live normal lives. Brenda rose slowly. "Ms. Delaney, did you personally review a title report before authorizing construction across Parcel 12, 1846? I relied on our developer's assurances. Did you ever contact Russell Merrick or anyone at Redstone Ranch to verify boundary lines or request an easement?" A pause. "No." "Yet you fined him $14,000 for walking on his own land. That was standard procedure." Brenda held up the forged plat. "You submitted this map to the county, knowing it altered boundary lines to hide the encroachment." Karen's voice dropped. "It was presented to me as preliminary." "Preliminary fraud?" Brenda asked mildly. The attorney objected. The judge overruled. Karen had no answer. Judge Whalen didn't take long. He cleared his throat and delivered the ruling from the bench voice carrying through the hushed room. "This court finds overwhelming evidence that defendants knowingly or with reckless disregard developed and governed private property without legal authority. The HOA's actions against Mr. Merrick finds threats attempted gate installation are null and void." Plaintiff's right to restrict access across his land is affirmed until permanent resolution. All counterclaims are dismissed with prejudice. A collective exhale rippled through the gallery. Someone in the back whispered, "Yes." The judge continued. Furthermore, the court orders defendants to pay plaintiffs reasonable attorney fees and costs. A separate hearing will determine damages for trespass and emotional distress to Mr. Merrick. Karen sat frozen-face pale beneath courtroom lights. Her attorney scribbled furiously, already planning appeals that would never materialize. I turned to Brenda. She gave the smallest nod, eyes shining with quiet triumph. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward me like spears. "Mr. Merrick, will you evict the residents now? Will you demand the homes be demolished?" I looked straight into the nearest camera. No. I never wanted to punish families who bought in good faith. I wanted the theft stopped, the lies exposed, and my rights respected. Today, the court confirmed those rights. The rest will settle fairly. The clip ran nationwide by evening. That night, Karen resigned. An emergency vote elected Dean as interim president. He called me before the ink was dry. "Russell," he said, voice thick with exhaustion and relief. "It's over. The old board is gone. The Denver lawyer quit this afternoon. We're done fighting you." I listened to the quiet on the line. "We want to work with you," he went on. "Whatever comes next, settlement, sale, whatever you decide, we'll negotiate in good faith. No more games." I believed him. They had built 50 homes on land that still carried the echo of my father's footsteps. They had sued me, vilified me, tried to break me with paper and process. But the court had spoken clear and final. The truth had won. And now, for the first time since that frost-glazed morning when I found the fence gone, the path forward was mine to choose. Not theirs. Mine. The final offer arrived on a crisp February morning, hand-delivered by Cassidy Morales herself. She climbed the porch steps in her familiar blazer and boots combination, carrying a leather folio instead of the usual city envelope. The wind carried the faint scent of snow from the high peaks, and Daisy nickered softly from the corral as Cassidy approached. "Coffee?" I asked. "Always," she said with a small smile. We sat at the kitchen table where so many maps and legal papers had been spread before. She opened the folio and slid the document across the scarred oak surface. Permanent access agreement and municipal easement purchase. The city wanted to buy the road outright, not lease, not condemn, but purchase the 912-foot strip at fair market value, plus a substantial premium, $800,000 wired upon closing. Full indemnification against any past or future claims from the HOA, the developer, or individual homeowners. The surrounding land remained mine, untouched. The road would become public, maintained by the county, marked with reflective signs and native plantings along the shoulders. Brenda sat beside me, reading every line with the precision of a hawk. After 10 minutes, she tapped the signature page. "It's clean," she said quietly. "Better than clean. They've acknowledged your ownership in writing, assumed all risk, and priced it higher than any appraiser would dare." Cassidy nodded. "We can't have 50 families landlocked indefinitely. Emergency services need reliability. The school district needs certainty. And frankly, after everything that's come out, the city wants this resolved without more headlines." I leaned back and looked out the window toward the ridge. The gate still stood, though the chains hung loose now, the lock removed weeks ago under the temporary municipal agreement that had kept essential traffic moving. "You could say no," Brenda reminded me. "The judgment stands. You could keep the road private, force a bigger settlement, maybe even quiet title on the encroached acres." I knew she was right. I could have pushed harder, demanded removal of some homes, pursued millions in damages, let the developers, bondsmen, and title companies bleed for years. But I thought of Dean's call the night the judgment came down, his voice rough with relief and something like gratitude. I thought of the young mother I'd seen loading groceries that first day, now waving tentatively when our paths crossed at the gate. I thought of children riding bikes again on asphalt that would soon belong to the public, not to any one person's anger. And I thought of my father, who taught me that land wasn't just for holding, it was for stewarding, for passing on better than you found it. I picked up the pen. Cassidy exhaled as I signed. Brenda witnessed. We shook hands, and just like that, the vein that had fed Sage Hollow became Merrick Way, public, permanent, and paid for. 2 weeks later, I watched from the ridge as county crews removed the old gate entirely. They laid fresh blacktop, installed solar-powered streetlights, and planted clusters of ponderosa pine along the edges, real trees that would grow tall and throw real shade. Dean drove up the ranch road one Saturday with his son in the passenger seat and a folded lawn chair in the bed. "We took a vote last night," he said, unfolding the chair on my porch, "dissolving the old HOA structure. Starting fresh minimal covenants, no more heavy-handed boards, too many scars." I handed him a beer from the cooler. Smart move. He looked out across the valley where new green was beginning to push through the winter brown. "You didn't have to sell the road," he said. "You could have kept us twisting. A lot of folks down there know that now." I shrugged. Wasn't about twisting anyone. Was about remembering what belongs to who and what belongs to all of us. He nodded, took a long drink. "If you ever want to come to a block party, or just walk the old trail again, without anyone giving you side-eye, doors open." I smiled. "Might take you up on that." Months slipped by. Spring turned to summer, the creek ran high with snowmelt, and the cottonwoods leafed out thick and green. Houses in Sage Hollow changed hands quietly. Some families left, new ones arrived with eyes wide open to the history beneath their foundations. Life resumed its rhythms. One cool September morning, I saddled Daisy and rode the southern fence line, again the same path I'd taken that frost-dusted day when everything began. The ridge line looked different now, rooftops still nestled below, but softer somehow, blended into the landscape by time and distance. I paused at the rise, where the old fence had vanished, and looked down. Children's laughter carried on the breeze. A sprinkler hissed across a lawn. Someone waved from a driveway. Whether they knew who I was or not, the gesture felt like acknowledgement. The land remembered. The surveys still bore my name. The road bore my name too, in a way no one could erase. They had built 50 homes on my ranch. They had paved their future across my past. They had thought a quiet man would stay quiet. But I spoke clearly, legally, relentlessly. And because I did, the ground beneath their lives shifted from stolen to shared, from fracture to something closer to healing. I touched my hat brim in silent salute to the valley below, then turned Daisy toward home. The sky was wide, the wind clean, and for the first time in years, the weight I'd carried felt light enough to set down. Redstone Ranch stretched out around me, smaller by a narrow strip of asphalt, but larger in every way that mattered. The story wasn't over, but the fight was. And the land, my land, our land, would endure.